Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting, food.
Food? Yeah.
But not in the way you might think. We're not going to be talking about calories or diets or anything like that. We're
Right.
going way deeper than that. We're going to be looking at food in terms of how it affects us spiritually and physically.
It's really quite interesting how this idea of food being so central to our well-being,
Yeah,
it just keeps popping up
yeah,
across different cultures and times.
yeah.
We've got ancient wisdom, Kabbalah, Taoism,
Right.
even the Bible, story of manna, all kind of pointing towards this like deep connection between what we eat and how we experience life.
Yeah. There's that saying, you are what you eat. And I always kind of took that at face value, but I'm realizing now there's a lot
Yeah.
more to it than just our physical health.
Absolutely. And what we're going to be looking at today in these sources really suggests that food, it can impact everything,
Wow.
from spiritual clarity to even the quality of our dreams. It even delves into how, modern food production, with this huge focus on profit,
Yeah.
how that might actually be messing with our natural instincts when it comes to food.
Wait, really? Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, think about it for a second. The source, it talks about how our cravings, they originally evolved to guide us towards
Right.
the nutrients that our bodies actually needed.
Yeah.
But nowadays, so many foods are basically engineered to hijack those cravings.
Yeah.
They want to push us towards all this processed stuff.
Right.
That's really more about profit than actual nourishment.
Okay. I see the problem then. Like, we're being tricked into wanting things that aren't good for us, both physically and spiritually.
And this distortion of our natural desires,
Yeah.
it actually points to a deeper issue. The source calls it a lack of yearning for true soul nourishment. We're so busy kind of chasing this like fleeting satisfaction from empty calories. We've kind of lost sight of what truly nourishes us on a deeper level.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like we're constantly searching for fulfillment, but we're looking in all the wrong places. It's kind of like those people who get one cosmetic procedure after another,
Right.
always chasing some kind of external ideal of beauty.
Yeah, that's a really powerful analogy. And, this whole pursuit of the superficial, it really reflects a much deeper spiritual hunger.
Yeah.
And speaking of hunger, this is where the story of manna in the wilderness, I think it's really interesting.
Okay, remind me about that story. It's been a while since Sunday school.
Yeah, so basically the Israelites, they're wandering in the desert right after escaping slavery in Egypt. God provides them with manna, this like miraculous food that sustains them.
Right.
But even though they're having their needs met, they start complaining and they start longing for the foods they had back in Egypt.
Even if those foods weren't necessarily healthy, I always thought it was kind of an ungrateful move.
Yeah.
They were being miraculously fed.
Well, that's where the rabbinic interpretation of this story kind of adds another layer. It suggests that Pharaoh actually used food to control the Israelites, to keep them spiritually enslaved even though they had escaped physically.
Wait, hold on. Are we saying that certain foods could actually, like, hinder their spiritual growth?
That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. If you're constantly consuming food that makes you feel sluggish or it clouds your mind,
Right.
it's going to be a lot harder to connect with your higher self.
Makes sense.
It's almost like your spiritual antennas getting jammed.
Wow, that's a really interesting thought. So if we bring it back to today, are we saying that we're kind of like those Israelites still enslaved to some kind of modern day Pharaoh?
It's a really thought-provoking parallel, isn't it? Instead of Pharaoh, maybe it's the modern food industry.
Right.
With all this relentless marketing and these addictive ingredients,
Yeah.
constantly tempting us with things that ultimately don't serve our best interests.
So we haven't really escaped that cycle of craving and dependence. But the source also mentions figures like Daniel and Judith who made different choices, right?
Exactly. Those biblical figures really understood the power of food, and they actually prioritized clean and pure foods as part of their spiritual practice.
Huh.
And, this makes you wonder, could there be a link between the foods we consume and our spiritual, susceptibility,
Oh, that's a really good question to ponder. I mean, it really highlights the need to be more mindful about what we're putting into our bodies.
Yeah,
It's not just about the calories and nutrients, it's about something much deeper.
absolutely. And speaking of digging deeper, let's explore this concept from Kabbalah, the idea of nefesh.
Okay.
It's basically the animal soul that resides in our blood. And the source suggests that impurities in the blood can actually impact our spiritual clarity.
Whoa, okay, break that down for me. How does that connect to the physical body?
Well, think about the heart for a second. The organ that's responsible for pumping blood throughout our whole system. It plays such a crucial role in both our physical and spiritual well-being. And the source really stresses that even small amounts of impure food can taint our system, and it can hinder our spiritual growth, just like a single drop of poison can pollute an entire glass of water.
That's a really vivid image. So are we saying that like every bite we take has the potential to either nourish or harm us, not just physically, but spiritually as well?
That's the idea. And this concept of purity, it's not just about what we eat.
Right.
It also extends to our actions and our thoughts.
Okay.
The source highlights the teachings of the rabbis, who really emphasize that enduring insults and hardships with understanding can actually purify the blood.
So accepting life's challenges with grace can actually be transformative.
Precisely. It's about cultivating inner strength and resilience.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, it's a lot to digest, no pun intended.
I hear you. And speaking of digestion, let's shift our focus to another really vital organ, the liver. It's a real workhorse when it comes to purifying the blood. And the source makes this really fascinating connection between the liver and the biblical figure of Esau.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Esau and the liver. How are those connected? Okay, remind me who Esau was. Again, it's been a while since I've brushed up on my biblical figures.
Right, so Esau was Jacob's twin brother. And, he's often associated with like impulsiveness, giving into those immediate desires without really thinking about the long-term consequences.
All right.
He famously traded his birthright for a bowl of stew, valuing that instant gratification over something way more meaningful.
I see the connection now. So the source is saying that overeating and indulging in unhealthy foods, it's like giving in to those Esau-like impulses, prioritizing that immediate pleasure over long-term well-being.
Exactly. And when we're constantly overloading our liver, with all this rich, heavy food, it can't really function at its best.
Right.
It struggles to purify the blood, which can lead to all sorts of health problems. The source highlights how a lot of the health issues that we see in modern society might actually stem from this very imbalance.
It's like we're running our bodies ragged, never giving our digestive systems a chance to rest and recharge.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about the physical toll.
Yeah.
Remember, the source suggests that a burdened liver can also hinder our spiritual clarity.
Right.
It's like our inner light gets dimmed when our physical body is struggling to process all the excess.
So it's not just about what we eat, but also how much we eat. Moderation seems to be key here.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between nourishing ourselves and also giving our bodies a chance to kind of cleanse and purify.
Right.
And this brings us to another really fascinating concept from the source, the Yetzer Hara.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I fully understand it. Can you explain?
Sure, it's a complex idea, but essentially the Yetzer Hara is described as this inclination towards evil that kind of resides within each of us. It's that voice of temptation, urging us to indulge in all those like base desires and impulses that ultimately lead us astray.
So it's like our inner saboteur always trying to pull us off track.
Exactly, and the source suggests that our food choices can either strengthen or weaken that Yetzer Hara.
Okay.
When we give in to those cravings for, sugary processed foods, we're essentially feeding the beast.
That makes sense. It's like we're giving that inner saboteur more power, making it harder to resist other temptations in life.
Precisely. But the good news is we can also choose to nourish by ourselves.
Right.
The source highlights practices like fasting and mindful eating as ways to actually tame the Yetzer Hara.
Yeah, I can see how those practices would build discipline and help us resist those impulsive cravings.
Exactly. It's about training ourselves to make conscious choices. To pause and consider the long-term consequences of our actions.
Right.
Rather than just reacting to every whim and desire.
Okay, so this is all starting to connect for me, but there's one thing I'm still struggling with. The source mentions that the Hebrew word for faith, emina, sounds very similar to the word for kidneys, betawad.
Right.
I'm not sure I follow. How are those two concepts related?
That's a really interesting point. Remember, the kidneys are responsible for filtering waste from the blood.
Yeah.
Keeping our system clean and functioning properly. And the source seems to be drawing this metaphorical connection here, suggesting that faith, like the kidneys, helps us to kind of filter out those negative thoughts and beliefs that can contaminate our spiritual well-being.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's like faith acts as a sort of spiritual cleansing agent, helping us to stay focused on what's truly important.
Exactly. And this connection between physical and spiritual health, it's a recurring theme throughout our sources.
Right.
It's like every aspect of our being is interconnected, and when one part is out of balance, it affects the whole system.
I'm starting to understand, so it's not just about what we eat, but also how we eat it. the intention and awareness we bring to the act of eating can actually transform our entire experience.
You got it. And speaking of transforming our experience, the source mentions a fascinating connection between food and our dreams.
Oh, really?
It suggests that what we eat can actually influence the quality of our dreams.
Wait, really? I've never thought about that before. How does that work?
Remember how we talked about impurities in the blood clouding our spiritual clarity?
Yeah.
The source proposes a similar concept for our dreams.
Okay.
It argues that when we eat, heavy processed foods, it creates a kind of fog in our minds. And this fog makes it harder to access those deeper realms of consciousness where dreams originate.
So it's like our mental digestive system is struggling to process all those toxins and impurities, and that kind of spills over into our dream state.
That's a great way to put it. And on the flip side, when we eat clean and pure foods, it can actually help to clarify our minds and open us up to more vivid, insightful dreams.
It makes you wonder what kind of dreams the prophets and sages had. After all, they were known for their simple and pure diets.
That's a fascinating question, and it's something that, mystics and spiritual teachers of various traditions have explored for centuries.
Right.
They believe that through practices like fasting and mindful eating, they can actually cultivate the ability to have prophetic dreams and vision.
So it's not just about what we eat, but also how we eat it right. The intention and awareness we bring to the act of eating can actually transform our consciousness.
Absolutely. And that's why so many spiritual traditions place so much emphasis on ritual and ceremony around food. It's a way of acknowledging the sacredness of nourishment and of cultivating a deeper connection to the divine.
That makes a lot of sense, but there's one thing I'm still a bit unclear on. The source mentions that our food choices can either strengthen or weaken the Yetzer Hara. But how exactly does that work? Is it like some foods are inherently evil and others are good?
That's a great question, and it's one that has been debated for centuries.
Right.
Some spiritual traditions believe that certain foods, like meat, are inherently heavier and more likely to stimulate the Yetzer Hara,
Okay.
while others focus more on the intention and awareness behind our choices, regardless of the specific foods we eat.
So it's less about the food itself and more about our relationship to it.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. It's about recognizing that food is a powerful force and that we have the power to choose how we use it. We can either use it to fuel our lower desires or to nourish our higher selves.
I'm starting to understand it's like if we're constantly indulging in sugary treats and processed foods, it's going to make it harder to resist other temptations in life.
Right.
But if we're nourishing ourselves with whole, healthy foods, it can give us the strength and clarity we need to make more conscious choices.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of discipline and self-control, not just around food, but in every area of our lives. And that's something that takes practice and commitment.
It sounds like we have to be really intentional about our choices if we want to live a truly healthy and fulfilling life.
You got it. It's not about being perfect, but about striving to make choices that align with our values
Yeah.
and that support our overall well-being.
Okay, we talked a lot about the connection between food and spiritual clarity, the importance of mindful eating, and how our digestive system plays a vital role in both physical and spiritual health. And we've also discussed the challenges of the modern food landscape and the power we have to make conscious choices.
Yeah.
But there's one final piece of this puzzle that I'm curious to explore. The source mentions this idea that humans were originally designed to be vegetarian. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting concept to consider, and the source does make some compelling points.
Yeah.
For example, it points out that our digestive systems are actually more similar to those of herbivores than carnivores.
So are you saying that our bodies might be better suited for a plant-based diet?
That's what some researchers believe,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to think about the ethical implications as well.
Right. If we were truly meant to be vegetarian, it definitely makes you question the way we treat animals and, the impact of factory farming on the environment.
Absolutely. It raises all sorts of questions about our responsibility to care for all living beings and to live in a way that's sustainable and harmonious with nature.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Can you give us a quick recap of the key takeaways?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we are not just what we eat physically, but spiritually as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our food choices have a really profound impact on our clarity of mind, our emotional well-being, and even our connection to something greater than ourselves.
It's like food is this incredible bridge between our physical and spiritual selves, something we might not always consciously consider.
Exactly. And that's why mindful eating is so important. It's about slowing down, being present with our food and making choices that really nourish us on every level.
And we've also seen that the modern food landscape presents some serious challenges,
Right.
but we're not powerless. We can make conscious choices that align with our values and that support our overall well-being.
It's about taking back control of our health one meal at a time. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Right.
It's about making those small changes that add up over time.
So true. And it's been really fascinating to explore these ancient wisdom traditions and see how relevant they still are today. They offer us this roadmap for navigating the complexities of modern life.
Right.
And for cultivating a deeper sense of well-being.
Those ancient teachings are full of timeless wisdom. They remind us that everything is connected and that our choices have far-reaching consequences both for ourselves and for the world around us.
Okay, before we wrap up, I have one final thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Okay.
Imagine you could design a modern-day manna, a food that's perfectly tailored to nourish both body and soul. What would it be like? What properties would it have? How would it make you feel?
What a fantastic question to ponder. It really challenges us to think outside the box and to imagine a future where food is truly a source of healing and transformation.
I'd love to hear what our listeners come up with. Feel free to share your ideas on social media using #TheDeepDive.
And remember, the journey to true nourishment is an ongoing one. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the incredible power of food to transform your life.